I will give a word about myself, and then and a word about a little bit about NCS as well, and then I'll let Aditi do the same thing. I've been in IT for more years than I'd like to count, probably since the late 70s. And for the last 15 years, I've worked exclusively in IT security. As I mentioned, I'm a partner at NCS. At NCS, we provide a full risk of cybersecurity services, a full gamut of security testing services, from scanning and pen testing and code review, et cetera. But then today we're going to be talking about the compliance services that we offer, that are relevant to this discussion today: gap analysis and actual implementation through certification. We've been in business since 2005, and we've got probably something around about 150 customers or so. So that's just a brief word. Adi, I'll let you introduce yourself now, and please say a word about Accorian, and then kick us off into the discussion here.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, good afternoon, folks. My name is Aditya, Adi for short. I am the managing director of Accorian. So Accorian's been around for a couple of years now. We've been a HITRUST assessor from 2018. We've done over 400 engagements across the various compliance frameworks, security compliance frameworks of the world, whether it's HITRUST, HIPAA, ISO 27001, SOC 2, NIST, CSF, GDPR, CCPA, other ISO standards, etc. Accorian is also a HITRUST assessor and a SOC 2 auditor. Yeah, that's basically a quick introduction about ourselves. Along with conducting a lot of compliance-based services, Accorian also provides penetration testing services, red team engagements, etc. So we have a comprehensive end-to-end service line, which allows us to cater to industries like health, financial services, B2B tech, e-commerce, retail, SaaS, etc. And yeah, that's a little bit about ourselves. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. So one of the things that I'd like to first kick it off is, why should one really think about security certification or attestation of any nature? There's so many different acronyms out there in the world. Which one's right? Why should you go with one of them? I think today, as you work with clients, and if you're a service provider, a SaaS provider, you're anybody who's engaging with a larger client or a government agency, you need to meet and maintain some level of security, because you need to showcase security assurance to these end customers or partners or acquirers. So today, it's truly table stakes for doing business. It has become a growing customer prospect request. In order to meet the third-party requirements of vendor risk, one needs to ensure that they have some level of security assurance that they can showcase, and security certifications have become the way to be. It also allows you to truly build trust and improve your security. Now that you have a benchmark to attain, you automatically work towards having the right policies, the procedures, the SOPs, and control implementation in place in order to meet this particular standards or requirement, or this benchmarks requirements. It allows you to truly accelerate market growth, right? So when I talk about accelerating market growth, I today see security being an enabler for allowing organizations to grow in their business, for the simple reason that it takes away the conversation of security and assurance of one's data from off the table, and allows you to focus on true growth, right? So now that you have a security credential, you're upkeeping it, you automatically can take that question off the table and move towards growth of the business. And lastly, it allows you to work on continuous improvement. So that said, I'm going to hand it over to Tom, who's going to talk about some of the other some of the benefits, and how do you kind of consider what's the right standard.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the drivers here, and obviously the benefits that Adi was just talking about imply what some of the drivers are. But what's the right cert? What goes into my decision? Ideally, I'd like to be certified in everything, right? But of course, there's limits. It's time, money, and technical resources. So I'm going to have to prioritize. Here, you can look at a number of things. The first column here is really something to remember throughout as you're making your decision. certification to meet the market's demands, yes, but certification is about you being secure, not just checking off a box, right? And even just satisfying one key customer. If my eyes are focused too narrowly, I satisfy one need, I could leave my areas of my business exposed. Checking off the box isn't going to help you if you get a breach somewhere, right? So when considering all of these various certs that we're going to be talking about today, keep in mind that the end game here is that your business, your information, your customers' information, your partners' information is secure, right? So we see on this slide, sometimes it's easy to choose what type of framework. The customer demands can point us, very particularly at that. If you look at this, these next two here, the custom demands and meet the mandates, maybe you sign your contract with the customer and it's very specifically says you have to follow a particular security standard. Okay. Or I'm providing parties to a third service. I just signed as a service provider to large e-commerce provider. Okay. PCI. There's a PCI demand. Done. That's the one I need, or I need at least that one. Or I'm crunching data for a healthcare provider now. Okay. I'm flooded with PHI, HIPAA. Done. Need that. Or I'm going to be, I've recently acquired a lot of European customers. I'm going to maintain PII, right? Well, GDPR better be in my solution somewhere. Or I'm going to do work with federal agencies. Okay, now we're in the whole world of NIST and all the other FedRAMP and the other things associated with that. So sometimes, we can get very specific directives from some of the mandates we have in the business. It says here, sales department, take the issue off the table. That may be the key driving factor in most businesses. The salespeople come to us and say, if we want to sell into this marketplace, we need to have the following certification. Please take it off the table so that isn't part of the negotiation that we're going to do. By the way, and that leads us into the bottom here, where it says final decision. Is it IT's decision? Nowadays, picking the compliance is rarely an IT only decision, right? This isn't like, when I figure out what's the best firewall, or, do I do log monitoring in-house or out of house, right? No, this is a business decision that's made in conjunction with sales, marketing, corporate. In a lot of cases, you even see this decision made at the board level, depending on what's going on in your business. And of course, if you are the IT department and you're leading this, it's in your best interest to get as many folks involved, because at some point you're going to look at, the commitment this is going to take from your business in time and money. And in most cases, you're going to need some cooperation with that in the business in order to get that budget and get that cooperation with resources. Okay. That's something you'll be considering when you look at the different things. What will the commitment look like from my side? So, and then here, it's, the one that talks about showcasing security compliance to partners and clients. Here's, maybe I don't have any of those specific requirements we just talked about. Maybe my customers and partners just want to know that I have a strong security framework set up. So here the idea is to, and we'll talk about that in a moment here with ISO and SOC 2, but here the idea is to set up a broad framework and then be able to develop from there. So in continuing with that, you can see that what we've been talking about here, some of the key drivers that we've been talking about here are specifically this industry focus. What is the industry focus, and what is the data that I'm trying to protect here? We mentioned before, I mentioned if you got healthcare, okay, HIPAA, you got e-commerce, you got PCI, you want to supply federal agencies, you FedRAMP, NIST, all of that information that's going on. Geography is also a consideration. Where are your customers? Where are you trying to get certified? Certainly, if you're looking at the different certifications, an ISO certification, since it's an international standard, is going to travel better than a SOC 2 standard. If you have European customers, then it's GDPR, right? So, that's a consideration. And of course, the base information we're talking about, be it, privacy information, be it healthcare information, be it credit card, drives it as well. Size of your organization is going to, you may have multiple for instance, multiple SOC 2 certifications within the organization in different locations. That's also something to consider. But, you know, what we point out here, this thing about the base standard, that's what I started talking about in the last page. You know, it's quite often these days where your business is going to need multiple certifications, right? So, you know, more and more common every day. So if that's the case, where do I start, right? Well, let's start with a base standard, you know, something NIST, HIPAA, SOC 2, and then set that up and pivot from that into the other ones I need. Now, why are we going to pick, you know, why are we specifically going to pick, I mentioned ISO and SOC 2. Why are we going to pick those for the examples we're giving next? I'm going to leave that to Adi discuss, because you'll see here setting a base framework and then having the ability to pivot there to some of the other ones that we're, some of the other standards that we're talking about. Aditya, I'll let you first talk about all of these different compliances and how they fit to industry, and then a word about SOC and ISO.
Sure. So coming to industry and compliance frameworks, how does one really understand, you know, if you're a banking and financial services company, what are the credentials that you have to go and attain? If you're in health, which ones do you do? If you're SaaS, technology, or MSP, which one do you kind of go with? So I'll start with banking and financial services. I think SOC 2s have become the de facto standard. ISO, if you're a global company, the NIST CSF, of course, to showcase maturity, GDPR and CCPA for privacy, and PCI DSS, if you're taking in credit card information in any form, or you support credit card payments. Same thing for similar for SaaS, except that for SaaS you might have, you know, the health-based frameworks also coming into picture, or you might have FedRAMP that might come into picture. You may have CMMC based on type of data you consume. So it's all based on, if you're taking in health data, then it's HIPAA, HITRUST. If you're looking at, you know, if you're taking in government information or classified, unclassified information, it can be CMMC, FedRAMP. It can be the NIST 853, etc. And so I've kind of laid it out here. Hopefully this kind of helps you understand which is the right framework. That said, this is not a full list. It is just a representative list of what certifications or credentials one should attain. Only a few of them have certifications that have been listed here. A lot of them are just standards or frameworks that you can work towards, you know, meeting, which, for example, the NIST CSF, right? So that said, I'm just going to jump into the ISO and there's 27001 and SOC 2. So, you know, I'd like to call out, and I've basically called out both of them side by side. This has primarily been the most common credentials in the last 5 years for companies to try and attain as their first security credential. If you're more global, the ISO is something that you might want to adopt. If you're more North America centric, then the SOC 2 is a SOC 2 report is a great credential or great report to showcase security assurance to your customers about, right? There's a little subtlety in differences in what kind of, you know, who can attest to it, and, you know, who do you kind of have to work with to get a certification. And ISO requires a registrar, a SOC 2, you know, a licensee CPFM. The validity is 3 years for a SOC 2 and ISO. A SOC 2 is valid for a year. The implementation is right about the same amount of time. Also, the number of controls are very, very similar. Security controls have to be applied for both. So the main difference in the two is, I would call out, is, you know, the ISO is more global, SOC 2 is more North America centric. In a SOC 2, you can have different nuances to it. SOC 2 is governed by something called as Trust Service Criteria, or TSCs. You can have security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. You kind of decide which one applies to you based on the type of nature of business you're in. But the security is the base TSC that everybody has to, you know, meet and maintain. The ISO, and the last difference is the ISO is a framework and the SOC 2 is an auditing procedure. And the SOC 2 has two types of audits, the type 1 and the type 2. The type 1 is typically for organizations looking at the SOC 2 for the very first time, who have controls in place but do not have maturity to showcase. Whereas, you know, a type 2 essentially focuses on at least showcasing 6 months steady state or controlled maturity and process maturity of your organization, which can then be accepted as a credential. The type 2 is a more sought after credential when it comes to a type 1, because it does showcase that you've had these processes in place, and thus, end customers might request for these, right? Yeah, so that's a little bit about a brief. These are the two most common PACE standards, that is adopted around the world, and especially in North America. So this is basically, what I'd want to talk about. I'm going to let Tom talk about some of the other credentials out there.
Okay, thank you, Adi. Yeah, no, and before we branch out and look at all of the other certs, because there's a lot of other ones, we'll just, what you look at here is, what am I getting into here? For instance, in these two certifications that we just talked about, what's it going to take me? What is my investment in here? So you see here the phases, and they're essentially broken down into this preparation phase on the left, the pre-audit phase, that is me getting ourselves set up, getting our business set up before the actual auditor comes in. And then we've got the actual auditing phase, and then the continuity, the renewal phase. So now, you can see the time period for the pre-audit and the auditing activity. We're not talking months and months here. We're talking about a couple months, right? The wild card in all of this is this prepare phase, right? In the prepare phase, that is, am I ready right now to even think about calling in an auditor? And that phase, you can see the wide range, it says here, 2 to 6 months. Well, I think of it more like 2 weeks to infinity, right? I mean, sometimes you go into a place and they've never done a penetration test. They've never done a scan. So obviously all of, that would have to be implemented. How long does it take to implement that? Or even longer things. Or sometimes you go in and people are doing everything properly and right. They're ready for an audit today. But guess what? They haven't written anything down. They don't have any policies and procedures. So the preparation time can get, elongated. So there's that time to consider. And that's the hardest time to estimate when people come to us cold and say, how long is it going to take me? Well, first we have to do a gap analysis of your environment and find the difference between where you are now and where you have to be in order to get this certification. So once we go through that gap analysis, that preparation phase, then it's time to seriously look at, what we're going to do here. So the pre-audit that we're talking about here is, you're going to be paying someone to come in here and do an audit. You don't want to fail the audit, right? So the pre-audit is, in ISO, it's also called an internal audit, right? It's an audit done in-house before I call the auditor in to make sure we're right here. SOC, it's the same thing. You'd want to set yourself up to make sure, if you've got an internal auditing department, they can do it, or you can do it within the IT department, or, or something like that. Actually, with ISO, you can't do it within the pre-audit. Has to be done outside of the IT department. But when the auditor comes in, they're going to expect this thing is ready to go. And so then they're going to come in, and that's what we got here. We've got the type 1 and type 2. In the SOC, in the ISO world, you've got this, stage 1 and stage 2 type audit that goes on. Stage 1 is essentially, are these guys set up? Do they have documentation in place? Have they written the right regulations and rules? Okay, now are the controls in place? That's stage 1 and stage 2. In SOC is it's a deeper report that comes out of the SOC certification. So in SOC, you're going to do this type 1 activity, which is coming in to see if you've set up everything fine, see if it's working. But then this SOC 2 report that comes out sometime later. You can see we've got up here a maturity period of around 6 months that this comes out, right? Sometimes later. That's the one that says, not only was it in place at that time and place I looked at it before, but it's not been working for 6 months and it's working fine, right? So that SOC 2 report comes out there. It says 1 week here, but keep in mind, this wall clock time is, like 6 months or so. And then in addition to the work done before, the actual auditing work, there's continuity work, right? So for SOC 2, there's going to be an annual renewal audit that comes up. For ISO, there's going to be, after that first full audit, there's going to be 3 years of maintenance audits, they call them, which are smaller audits. And then on the 4th year, you return to the major audit again. So usually a key question, how long does it take? This gives you a general idea. Again, that preparation time being the wild card in how long it's actually going to take. Okay, so why did we have Adi go through the ISO and SOC comparison there? Why do we use it? Why did we lay out that one as opposed to, you know, PCI or HIPAA or something? Because remember we said you get yourself a base standard and you pivot. This is a great base standard. As you see here, you know, if you put SOC 2 in place, for instance, look at HIPAA, you've already got 51% of HIPAA done. Those controls, this is 51% of the requirements, the controls that are defined in there are actually satisfied at this point. And one thing to keep in mind here, when I say 51%, it's really more than 51%. Because remember, we were just talking about that prepare phase, right? Well, if you've done the prepare phase, you know, you've probably done all the prepare phase for HIPAA as well. So now what you're talking about is 51% of that remaining time. So if prepare took you 40% of your time, you're talking 51% of, you know, 60% of the time it took you to do the SOC 2 attestation to begin with. Okay, so it gives you an idea here of why these would be good ones to use as a base and pivot off of. And now we can look at some of the other more specific ones. Adi, I will send it back to you to look at HIPAA HITRUST.
Sure. So HIPAA and HITRUST have become very, very, very popular health data security certifications or frameworks to look at. The HIPAA is a framework. It doesn't have a third-party certification. It is governed by the government. You know, updates are based on Congress, and there's no third-party independent contractor. What you get from HIPAA is a set of requirements, a set of rules that you need to ensure that you're meeting in order to safeguard health data securely. There are certain mandatory annual activities that you have to conduct in order to state that you're HIPAA compliant. But as long as you're following these rules, you don't need to get a third-party attestation. And that said, the HITRUST is more newer. You know, it's a couple of years old now, but it's growing very, very fast as the gold standard of health data security. And it is an attestation that is being looked at by multiple companies around the world to showcase health data security and assurance to their customers. So if you're anybody who's in health or is in SaaS or is a service provider who's consuming health data, this is a certification to look at because it's extremely prescriptive. It has more robust security requirements. It is updated often, at least annually, and that is a third-party independent assessment that one has to go through to showcase meeting HITRUST requirements. Thus, it's more sought after, right? So that's a little bit on health. I want to talk quickly about why do HITRUST in general, and that's the next slide, which is like I was saying, you know, if it's security in general and security certifications today, this fast becoming table stakes for showcasing security assurance to your customers. So, you know, this is allowing you to showcase your company's security, its posture to internal, and external stakeholders. It has become table stakes for doing business, whether you're a healthcare company who's doing or a SaaS provider who's coming in contact with health data. You need to be able to showcase a HITRUST certification because it's something that is being governed by the larger insurance brands and health systems. So whether you're working with Aetna, Express Scripts, Humana, they all require the vendors to meet HITRUST requirements. It also, by virtue of you meeting HITRUST requirements, you also might be requiring your third parties, which is actually the fourth parties for these end customers to meet HITRUST requirements. Right? HITRUST is fast going beyond healthcare. It is being adopted by Sabre for showcasing travel data security. Right? The level of rigor that HITRUST requires truly showcases that you're 100% on board with bringing on security, meeting the requirements. You're extremely serious about it, and it frankly covers the entire breadth and depth across 19 domains of HITRUST. Right? And hence it's extremely popular. So yeah, so that was a quick discussion on HIPAA and HITRUST. I'm going to hand it over to Tom for PCI.
Yeah, just a quick word on PCI. PCI is a good example of a certification in which you can have multiple levels of certification. So PCI, by the way, is the certification that's given for companies that are managing credit card information, cardholder data. So you don't process a credit card unless you have a PCI cert, or if you do, then you're going to get majorly fined, for doing it. And nowadays, it's really, you don't even provide services to a company unless you've got a good PCI cert. I mean, if I'm an e-commerce company handling credit cards, I have every year I have a PCI QSA coming in, doing an audit against me, right? That auditor is going to want to know, hey, this third party you have is accessing your information. Are they PCI certified? And I can argue with them and say, well, they don't really look at the card holder data. They're just down here looking at some output from our printer. They've got nothing to do with it. I can either argue with the auditor, or I can just say to every third party that comes into my business, I want a PCI cert from you, right? And then when the auditor comes in, he just sees all the third party certs and he's done. So nowadays, this PCI thing isn't really just if you're maintaining cardholder data. It's if you're even playing with a company that has cardholder data. And you can see here the different levels of certification. This level 1, this is actually a little misleading here. It's generalization. It's not just these number of transactions. Anyone who is maintaining and holding in their database cardholder data, or who has in the past been breached, or who their acquiring bank just says you've got to have a level 1, has to have this report on compliance. This is a full QSA audit, and it's a full audit in the same way that we talked about the audits of SOC and ISO before. Now, if you're actually not the company that has the cardholder data, you're just participating in some aspect of e-commerce, then you can have an SAQ assigned to you here. And these are various levels, the self-assessment questionnaire. Some of them are very simple. You just fill out a form and you're done. So this is an example. PCI is a good example of a certification which different levels are defined for how you interact with the information which is trying to be protected. So that's a quick idea of PCI. All right, so we've been talking about certification, right? Now, there's lots of ways you can be certified. Some of the other ones are shown here. Not all security solutions you implement get certified, right? These are, what we're talking about here are general frameworks that I can implement. And the language gets a little muddled and overlapping here between, the way we use it. Technically, SOC 2, for instance, is a security framework. And then the audit that within it is the certification for that particular implementation. So you can get a cert, you can get audited against that particular certification. Can I get a certification for NIST 800-171, which Adi will be talking about in a minute? No, I can't. That's the framework. So does that mean a framework is less secure than something I can get certified? Absolutely not. Right? That's why I said the language gets a little muddled here. The framework is there as guidance to help your business, understand, manage, and reduce your cybersecurity risk as best it can. And then it may be certified. So for instance, ISO is a good example, right? We said ISO 27001 is a framework of an ISMS, right? The actual controls that you implement within the framework aren't even in 27001. They're in a company standard called 27002. That's got all the controls that have to be in place, the appropriate controls. But I can get ISO 27001 certified and not use 27002. I could use the NIST controls, right? So the framework is the ISMS telling you what to do, and then there are specific controls to get implemented within that framework. And that's usually where the certification comes into play. So flexibility within framework. So frameworks, right? And all of these security solutions we're talking about have are frameworks. Frameworks lay out the best practices to help you decide how to implement the security standard for your company, right? And some of the examples you see here. So, we can just run through a bunch of these. for instance, NIST 53 is for a federal agency that wants to get certified, where 171 is for you're not a federal agencies, but you're interacting with federal agencies. FedRAMP is again a federal standard under NIST, and it's for cloud implementations. Can I get certified in FedRAMP? Yes, actually can. You know, there's a lot of these things associated with here. CMMC, the one down the bottom here, is also federally related. That's the Department of Defense for, you know, if you're going to play with defense contractors. You see a number of ISO numbers here. So that ISO 27001 is part of the ISO 27000 family, right? So like 22301 is the cert for business continuity management. You want a particular certification that shows if there's disaster recovery, you've got something in place. 27018 is for cloud management. 31000 is, you know, it's just privilege and guidelines for risk management. So there's a lot of different ones that can be associated. We see COPA in here. That's the Child Protection Act to keep children from accessing certain things. So, you know, we could spend days here talking about this. We know you don't have days, so we're highlighting the key activities here. I will, but a little word behind NIST, since, you know, some of you may play with the federal agencies, and NIST is a key component about that. I'll let Adi address the NIST point here. Adi?
Yeah. So the NIST CSF was something that was formulated by the government because they started to see a lot of attacks on critical infrastructure in the US, right? So it started to become, you know, a well sought after credential or a framework that one needs to look at while assessing what is their current maturity at. So for me, I personally look at the NIST CSF as the answer to understand what is my current maturity as an organization. There are 5 domains: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. As you can see, the last 3 are all about, you know, response and, you know, detecting when things are going amiss, right? And so NIST CSF, you know, essentially using the NIST CSF, you can assess what is your current maturity at, which I will define as the current profile. Then you can remediate, and then you can identify what kind of, you know, once you've identified your gaps, you can go ahead with remediation, start remediating some of these, and move towards your desired maturity. Then the CSF has also published for various organization types what should their desired or target profile look like. For example, financial services might have a score of 5, you know, or 4, 4.2. You know, health might have a score of 4.1. So you can find these scores, and these become benchmarks that you need to attain in order to state that you've truly met the requirements of NIST CSF. I'd like to quickly talk about, you know, a case study now. Typically, you know, we've seen a lot of companies. You know, we work with a lot of B2B SaaS organizations that need to, you know, comply with HITRUST, SOC 2, you know, ISO, GDPR, PCI, just because of the nature of business, right? Now, this particular SaaS company takes in a lot of information. They're global in their nature. You know, how did we kind of work with them, and how did we implement the common control framework? So, you know, as you know, when we start to look at the entire setup as NCS and Accorian, we realize that there has to be one standard that is a base. So we use the SOC 2 as the base. We started implementing all the various requirements, told the customer what are the current gaps, helped them around the entire remediation part, and then, you know, got them attested, you know, on SOC 2. Once that was done, we then made the pivot to ISO, which is very similar to the SOC 2. That was an easier pivot. We were able to do that in 45 days. And from there on forth, we went to HITRUST, PCI, and GDPR. So the ability of us to, you know, once we had at least 1 or 2 credentials in place, there were a lot of the common stuff already in place, you know, your security policies and procedures, your security workflows, SOPs, technical controls like DLP, MDM, 24/7 security monitoring, they're already in place, right? So, you know, meeting requirements of these newer standards was so much more easier. So, you know, that's when we realized that we were able to save a lot of time for the customer, reduced a lot of audit fatigue, because, you know, the moment we met, you know, SOC 2 requirements, we knew the ISO is going to be much faster. and then the evidence was very similar. The HITRUST was on similar lines. Once the two frameworks or standard SOC 2 and ISO were attained, the delta to kind of meet HITRUST was a lot lesser. So kind of used one as a base framework and pivoted to the common control framework, and saved a lot of time for the end customer. And that kind of enabled them to meet all these requirements in less than 8 months, which was I'd say in record time, right, in the world of security. Now, that said, I'd like to quickly talk about how 2022 is very different this year, right? And this is a very special year. So 2022 is truly the year of changes. The SOC 2 has a new version coming up, the SSAE 21. The ISO has a new standard coming out. The 27002 is already out. The 27001 is also coming out soon. PCI had a new framework or a new standard that's come out. Organizations have 2 years to meet these requirements. So the PCI 4.0 has come out, and HITRUST came out with a new version, which is HITRUST version 9.6, right? So a lot of changes. This only means that organizations now have to figure out if they're already truly, already attested or certified. They have to figure out what is the delta between their current, framework or standard vis-a-vis the new framework. You can get this information online, of course, and then conduct a very quick analysis to understand whether they're going to meet the new requirements or not. If they're not, then they should start remediating or implementing the new additional controls that these standards and frameworks require. Because when it's time for the recertification or reassessment, those would come into picture, right? So that's 2022 as a year. All right, so now I'm just going to, Tom and I are going to talk about some of the common challenges and how can we help.
Yeah, thank you, Adi. By the way, Adi, I think that was a great example with the NIST and CSF. It hammered home a lot of things we said about, using the base strategy to pivot to the other ones. And, why would I implement a framework if it can't be certified? I thought that was a really good example of bringing all those ideas together. Yeah, and this is just common challenges and how we can help. I think that most of these challenges on the left-hand side are probably recognizable to the folks that we're talking to today. We don't have to go through every one, but you can see it's the complete gamut of security services, from very simple things like vulnerability scans to more involved activities, all the way through providing actual staff, virtual CISO staff, things like that. So it's the whole world of security risk assessment, the implementation of it, and the ongoing maintenance of it. On the right-hand side, you see the type of services that get delivered. Note that some of these are personnel services, and some of these are actual products that are associated with ongoing work that can augment your staff on an ongoing basis. Adi, do you want to say anything else about these?
Yeah, so I think the common challenges kind of reflect everything that organizations need to have in place if you're doing any certification or trying to meet any framework. You got to have security policies, and you got to do a risk assessment. You need to have the right technical tool implementation, whether it's MDM, DLP, antivirus, awareness training, gap assessment, yada, yada, all of that stuff. Now, as Accorian NCS, we've worked with dozens of customers trying to help them with end-to-end implementation services. Start from the very basics of scoping, gap analysis, remediation advisory, penetration testing. You need your policy procedures written up. We've typically helped them, security audit services, whether it's ISO 27001, HITRUST, SOC 2, etc. We've helped them out with. So there are different ways how we can help organization, or like Tom mentioned, you might have short-term security talent requirements, whether it's vSecurity team, whether it's vCISO services. We do a lot of staff augmentation as well for short services or short durations of time, which typically meets the requirement of you attaining your next credential, right? And we have our own in-house portal as well, which is GoReco, which is for security, compliance, maintenance, and sustenance. So in a shell, we basically help a lot of companies. We can help with any security compliance from start to finish. Now, that said, we'd open it up, Q&A. We've also called out Greg's contact details. If you'd like to touch base with him and talk more, I'll let Tom talk about it.
Yeah, Adi, I can see one question that came in. I'll start an answer and then hand it to you. We can see that this is going to require a lot of resource for any of the certifications. How do I compare do it myself versus getting outside assistance? Well, that's of course a question we love to answer. First of all, if you choose a partner, get clarification, specific clarification from them about what their involvement is going to be and what your involvement is going to be. The idea of you just giving this to a third party probably isn't the right idea. You're going to have to cooperatively working with these folks. Nobody is going to know your business like you do ever, no third party, right? So find out what it is you can do in-house and how best you leverage that third party you're bringing in. For instance, when you're in that preparation phase, you're doing the gap assessment, maybe you don't have any documents, and maybe documents are easy for you to write. So you're going to write those documents yourself, and maybe the third party can give you templates for those documents. But maybe there's something more involved. Maybe you have to implement security monitoring, log monitoring, and you haven't done security monitoring before. Maybe that's something you want to have the third party assist you with, or vice versa. Maybe you want the third party to do the documents. So I would say if you're involving yourself with a third party, get very clear about about what you're going to do and what they're going to do. Hey, third party, are you going to do the certification? Are you going to hold my hand during someone else doing the certification? Get everything exact, because there's a lot of aspects to this. Adi, we'll let you comment as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's about, I'd also talk about what kind of deadlines are you working with, right? Typically, if you have, a lot of time, if you're trying to, meet it across a couple of months, a couple of years, of course you have time, the luxury of time. But if you're trying to, if you're in a small deadline, short deadline, then you of course need the experts. And that is where I would suggest working with partners as much as trying to figure it out yourself, because they can come in and do the implementation, help you through the entire thing, and be in the trenches truly with you to kind of get you to from start to finish and get you certified. And that's my 2 cents on
there's also the ongoing, right? Like the keeping it maintained and solution for that as well, right? So we have a solution in place, or a software solution in place to automate that for them as well.
No, absolutely. And essentially our automated solution enables organizations to all the time understand, are they still meeting HITRUST requirements? Sorry, not HITRUST, SOC 2 requirements or ISO 27001 requirements, or are they meeting NIST CSF requirements? You can get a real-time analysis of where you at from your security compliance posture and whether you're still meeting these requirements. All right, so okay. Tom, there's one question that I see here, which is we're a fintech, and we're a fintech SaaS, and we need to meet SOC 2 and PCI, right? What do you recommend first, and how do we go about it?
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll take the question first. So essentially, I'd start with understanding, what do you kind of have to meet first, figure out that deadline with business, right? Do you have to get your SOC 2 first because a lot of customers are asking for it, or do you need your PCI first because that's what your acquiring banks are, asking you for, because that's your mode of accepting payments. So I think it's first typically very, very important to understand which is the more bigger burning issue that you have to meet. That said, you can always power through, using consultants or, companies like ourselves to try and meet your next credential. But that said, understand what kind of deadlines you're working with before, signing up for either of the two, right? You can pivot. There is a lot of mapping that, we help organizations figure out. But, that's what I'd have to say. Tom, what are your thoughts?
No, I mean, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you stated that well and concisely. So, in interest of time, maybe we'll just take one more question. I can see this is expensive. Can you give me an idea of how much this is going to cost? Well, boy, that it is. I mean, the range, I'll let Adi speak to some of the ranges he's seen in cost. But essentially, when we talk about cost, you know, you have to think of the cost of the certification. You have to think the cost of engaging a third party if you've engaged a third party. But, you know, and then the cost of your, you know, the personnel, the hours you're applying to it. And then very important, the preparation phase, where you're overcoming the gap that you have during the gap assessment, you're implementing new technology. So based on that, the costs are all over the place. Adi, I'll let you just comment on what you've seen in, you know, most of your cost range.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think there are a lot of costs that one needs to factor, whether it's consultant costs, whether it's true implementation costs, whether it's procurement or security solutions. You know, it could be a couple of thousands, you know, to start with, and can grow significantly based on the size of your company and the kind of certification you're trying to meet. That said, try and get an all-in estimate, a fixed number as to where, you know, how much is it going to cost for you to, you know, get to your SOC 2 or NIST or HITRUST. That way it allows you to plan and budget internally better, rather than making it a very variable cost. So try and work with vendors who can provide you that, you know, guesstimate or, you know, some sort of final range after very quick preliminary analysis of where you at in your security journey. Just allows you to, you know, be better prepared and not have surprises at the end of the day. So yeah, it could be a couple of thousand, it can be a couple of tens of thousands as well of dollars. So, you know, it grows fast, but it all depends on what certification and what is your current security posture at.
Yeah, well stated. Well stated. Okay, well, I think we're probably beyond our scheduled time here, so we'd like to thank everyone for participating today. You can see the contact numbers on the screen for those of you who would like to follow up. We hope you've enjoyed this and gotten some great information from it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you all. Have a great day.